Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have limited time. We have a hard stop for you all at 1, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure that people will trickle in and they will miss my compelling opening remarks, but that's okay. First things first, you are being recorded. We will have this session available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and on Facebook. So please do point people to it if you find the session useful, but you are being recorded today, and we like to let you know that up front. Welcome to Disability Rights South Carolina. This is Transition Services 101, the role of vocational rehabilitation. First things first, we're going to put up a quick poll that kind of lets us know who you are. And this is so we can tell our funders what we've been doing. So if you would, please, if you're an attendee, let us know who you are. And I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes to let some replies roll in. Okay, I think we've got most of our participants captured. Everyone, thank you so much for doing that. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. We'll be taking questions at the end of today's session. Our presenters will leave some time for questions. If you're able, please put those in the chat box once we wrap up the presentation, or if you're not able to use the chat box, please raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question. Can we go to the next slide, please, Phil? Maybe one more. Nope, maybe we don't have our scheduling slide up, but our next session is August 16th. It is the same time at noon. It is a lunch hour, and it is on the Medicaid services and EPSDT mandates. So we hope that you all will tune in for that, but do keep in mind that these are recorded and these are all available for viewing and distribution on our website. So let's go back to the beginning, Phil. Sorry. Today we have one of our senior attorneys at Disability Rights South Carolina, Pete Cantrell, and the Director of Employment Programs at ABLE South Carolina, Sandy Jordan, here to talk to you today about the role of vocational rehabilitation. So I'm going to let you guys take it away. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erin. This is Pete Cantrell, and I'm sorry, but my camera is not working today, so you guys won't be able to see me. Tell you a little bit about Disability Rights South Carolina first. We're a nonprofit. Our services are free and they're statewide. We're mandated by both state and federal law to protect the rights of people with disabilities in South Carolina. We're independent of agencies that provide treatment or other services to people with disabilities. And our mission is to protect and advance the legal, civil, and human rights of people with disabilities in South Carolina. Some of you may still remember we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy for People with Disabilities, or P&A for short. Next slide. Our services at Disability Rights South Carolina are pretty flexible. We provide information and referral to people who call in and want that. We provide legal support in terms of legal representation to people up to and including class action litigation. We provide education and outreach like what we're doing here today. We do monitoring and investigations of situations where people with disabilities may be abused or neglected. And we get involved in public policy on behalf of people with disabilities. Next slide, please. Now, VR is a partner in the transition process with the schools and the parents and students. They should be involved in transition planning, including doing outreach to an identification of students who may need transition services as early as possible in the process. They provide consultation and technical assistance to help in transition planning. And they get involved with school personnel to facilitate the development of the IEP. They're an important player in this area. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. There we go. VR must inform students about their purpose, the application procedures, eligibility requirements, and what kind of services they offer. Again, as early as possible during the transition process. The reason for this is to enable the students with the disabilities to make an informed choice on whether to apply for VR services while they're still in school. It is the students and the family's choice, not anybody else's, about whether to apply for VR services while they're still in school. Next slide, please. Now, how can South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department or the South Carolina Commission for the Blind help with transition? And it's important to say now, a lot of times you'll hear me say VR in this presentation. That applies to both the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department and to the South Carolina Commission for the Blind, because they act as the vocational rehabilitation agency for people who are blind. There's levels of services that these agencies can provide that help with transition. The first is pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS, for students with disabilities. And we're going to talk about each of these services a little more later on, but pre-ETS do not require an application. The next level is transition services for students and youth with disabilities. In that case, you must apply for the services. And then there are other VR services, such as transportation, rehabilitation technology, that also require an application. Next slide, please. Now, the pre-ETS, or the pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS as we call them for short, are really important. There's something relatively new. Congress thought it was so important, it required each state's VR agency to set aside a minimum of 15% of their public VR funds for the pre-ETS. These are provided to students with disabilities, regardless of whether they've applied for VR services. Next slide, please. Now, who's eligible? Who is a student with a disability? They're enrolled in school. They're aged 13 to 21 in South Carolina. You'll hear 16 to 21 in a lot of places. That's what the federal law requires. But if your state has a provision that requires transition services to start earlier, in other words, IDEA transition services, special education transition services to start earlier, then you use that age. And in South Carolina, we start at 13, so 13 to 21. And the student is either receiving transition services under IDEA, in other words, they have an IEP, they're enrolled in special education, and they're getting transition services, or they're an individual with a disability as that is defined in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So it could be a student who doesn't need special education, but who does need accommodations and has a 504 accommodation plan. Could also be a student who has neither an IEP or a 504 accommodation plan, but have some kind of a disability that allows them to qualify for protection under Section 504. An example might be a student who uses a wheelchair, but doesn't need special education services. And because, let's say, the school is an accessible school, they don't really need accommodations either. But they would still qualify for help from VR with the pre-eds. Next slide, please. Examples of the pre-eds: job exploration counseling. My favorite one, and I think one of the most important one, work-based learning experiences in integrated settings in and out of school. Everything that I've learned over the years about helping young people go to work, work-based learning experiences while they're young, while they're in school, are just critical to their work history later in life. And VR has special abilities in this area to help out the schools and make sure that students with disabilities get those work-based learning experiences while they're in school. Another pre-ed is counseling on post-secondary opportunities. Post-secondary is very different than high school, than the IDEA process. And it's important that students understand that and are prepared for it. Next slide, please. Workplace readiness training, things like social skills, independent living skills that help students with disabilities be prepared for operating successfully in the workplace. Self-advocacy instruction, really important. Person-centered planning, peer mentoring for people with disabilities. And along with self-advocacy instructions, one of the most important types of self-advocacy, is speaking up when you need an accommodation, asking for an accommodation, whether at a college or university or in a work setting. And that self-advocacy instruction is part of the pre-eds. Next slide, please. VR is supposed to coordinate the pre-eds. And to do that, the local VR offices must attend the IEP meetings when invited. And remember that either the student or the parent or the school district can invite people to the IEP meetings. It can be real important to have somebody come to talk about what VR can offer and why the student might want to go ahead and apply for VR services while still in high school. VR offices must also develop work opportunities, like I was talking about earlier, internships, summer employment, apprenticeships, things that will give those students some good ideas and some good practical experience in what work's like. The VR offices must also work with the schools to coordinate and ensure the provision of the pre-eds under this section. The pre-eds are typically delivered at school, and so the VR staff have to work with the school staff to make sure it works. And then when invited, attending person-centered planning meetings for individuals receiving Medicaid. Next slide, please. Now, who is a youth with a disability? It's an individual with a disability who's not younger than 14 or older than 24. And this is important because you don't have to be a student to be a youth with a disability. Next slide, please. And youth with a disability and students with disabilities qualify for transition services. Now, a lot of these things sound confusingly similar, but the pre-ETS and transition services are different, although there might be a little overlap. The transition services are kind of a next level. They promote the movement from school to post-secondary education, vocational training, employment, whatever's next. And they're based on the individual's needs and their preferences. They can be delivered in school or after the student finishes school. Next slide, please. They may also include instruction, community experiences coming up again, and functional vocational evaluation. And they promote the achievement of the employment outcome identified on the IPE. And again, that's another one of those confusing terms. An IEP is what a student in special education has under the IDEA. An IPE is what someone who has applied for services from the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation or the Commission for the Blind, been found eligible. The next step is you develop an IPE, an individualized plan for employment. So the transition services would promote the achievement of the employment outcome identified on the IPE. And transition services include outreach to and engagement of the parents or the representative of the student or the youth. Next slide, please. Some examples of other VR services that you can get after you've applied and been found eligible. Transportation in connection with any VR service. And it's important to know that that doesn't include transportation back and forth to work every day. But there's a wide variety of services that may be provided in connection, that may be provided by the VR agency or as part of the IPE, and transportation to those services is an available VR service. Rehabilitation technology is a great service. Both the Commission for the Blind and VR have some trained staff who are very knowledgeable in this area. It not only includes the devices themselves or the software, it includes an evaluation to help determine what device or which software might be helpful. In addition, once a job is obtained, the staff can come on site, both to do the evaluation and to make sure that the technology is correctly installed and that the individual knows how to use it. Orientation and mobility services for individuals who are blind is another important service for people who are blind. Not only can it be orientation and mobility to a living situation, it also could be orientation to a workplace. And then finally, one of my favorites in the federal law, it says other goods and services needed to achieve an employment outcome. Always remember that one when you're interacting with VR. At the end of a very long list, that's what it says. And so there's always an argument that what you need is an other good and service. Next slide, please. The bottom line, VR is a partner with the schools in preparing students for school to work transition. Pre-ETS are important in preparing students for life after school, and they're available without the need to apply for VR services. Students can apply for VR services while in high school, and they may benefit from additional services like transportation or transition services. And requiring the IPE to be in place before the student exits school is essential to ensuring a smooth transition process. in which students do not suffer unnecessary delays in services and continue the progress toward employment they began while in school. What you really don't want to see is the student getting lots of services and making lots of progress under the IEP and the school transition process. They don't apply for VR services, and let's say they've applied for Medicaid waiver services, but they're on a long waiting list. School ends and they got no services. That is just a terrible place. We've helped some individuals in that situation, and it's a really bad place to be. So that's why it's important to apply for the VR services, get that IPE in place before the student exits school, so you don't have that drop off in services. Next slide, please. Now, how can Disability Rights South Carolina help? We can help people understand their rights to transition services from VR or the Commission for the Blind. We can help them receive better transition services if the services they're receiving are not helping them. Next slide, please. We can help if someone's been turned down for services by VR or the Commission, or if they're not getting help from VR or the Commission during high school. Let's say you tried to get VR involved, you invited them to an IEP meeting, you tried to apply for services, and they're telling you, oh, just wait until you're getting ready to leave or you're leaving. That would be a time that we could help. You've gotten involved, and VR has developed a plan, but you need a better plan. You don't like the IPE that you have, or maybe the job goal in the IPE, and you need some help to get a better one. We can help with that. Or you just need to better understand your right to services from VR or the Commission for the Blind. We can try to explain it to you. Next slide, please. It's Able, South Carolina, so I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Pete. And good afternoon, everyone. It's that weird time in the day where I have to think about, do I say morning or afternoon? So I think after 12 is definitely afternoon. I try to remember that, but thank you all for being here. As Aaron mentioned earlier, my name is Sandy Jordan. I am Director of Employment Programs with Able, South Carolina. My pronouns are she and her. And for those that may have a visual disability, so to give a visual representation of myself, I am a white woman with long brown hair. I am wearing glasses, and I have a red and black shirt on today. So let's get started. So before I kind of dive into some more practical transition tips, wanted to give a quick overview of Able, South Carolina and what exactly we do. Because along with Disability Rights South Carolina, we do help folks advocate for their services and their needs. So Able, South Carolina, we are a disability-led organization transforming systems, communities, and individuals. And what I want to emphasize here is that we're disability-led. So what does that mean? That means that the majority of our staff are people with disabilities. Over 80% of our staff are people with disabilities. And so that means that we not only understand disability services from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, because a lot of us have disabilities ourselves. We understand the barriers that people with disabilities face, and we understand the disability community. And so that makes us very unique in what we do. We are also community-based, which means that we go out into the community. We serve individuals with disabilities in their community. We do have an office in Greenville and Columbia, but folks don't have to come to our office. We can go to them. We can meet them in their homes. We can meet them in a community location. And then when we interact with our partners, we do a lot of community meetings where we actually go out in the community. We're consumer controlled. So that means the consumer, which is the individual with the disability, that they're in control of their services. They're the ones telling us what types of services they need, what type of support they need. We're not saying you need this type of services, this types of support. The consumer, the person with the disability, is telling us that. We're cross disability. So we serve individuals with all different types of disabilities. So any type of disability you can imagine, those are the folks that we serve. We are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, which means that we can really be innovative in what we provide. And a lot of times we've been able to apply for grants and additional funding because of some of the barriers that we've seen people with disabilities face, and because of what we really see as the need in the disability community in South Carolina. And then we are a federally recognized Center for Independent Living. And Centers for Independent Living are authorized through the Rehabilitation Act. So there are 3 Centers for Independent Living in our state. Able, South Carolina is one of them. We also have Walton Options and Accessibility. Next slide, please. So this slide gives an overview of Able South Carolina services. We have information and referral. So that means that if you call us, we can provide you with information and referrals to other agencies. Sometimes there may be services that we may not be able to offer, but we can refer you to other agencies. Sometimes folks call us and we're not really sure what the answer is, but we can do some research, do a little bit of digging, and then provide that answer and that connection with you. We provide independent living skills. And so a lot of times that may confuse people a little bit, but that is really where we work individually, one-on-one with consumers to help them lead their most independent life. And so again, this is consumer directed. Consumers tell us what types of goals they have, what is going to help them be more independent. So sometimes that's employment. Sometimes consumers have an employment goal. And so we work with them to determine, okay, what types of things do you need that's going to help you get to employment? So do you need to understand your employment rights? Do you need to understand how to request a reasonable accommodation? Do you need to understand what jobs might be a good fit for you? We also, with this independent living skills, like I said, it's just really depending on what the individual needs. And so sometimes it may be cooking. Somebody has acquired a disability now and they want to learn how to cook with their disability. We've gone out to folks' homes and helped them learn how to cook. So it's all based on what that individual needs and wants to help them be more independent. Peer support. This is something that we provide naturally because, like I said, the majority of our staff are people with disabilities. And so naturally we provide that peer support where we are people with disabilities, empowering other people with disabilities, teaching other people with disabilities, helping to advocate for other people with disabilities. Advocacy. We provide advocacy on an individual level and a systems level. So individual advocacy may look like in an employment realm, an individual may call us, say they're not receiving the services that they need from Vocational Rehabilitation or Commission for the Blind. They can let us know that, and we can work with them to help set up a plan for how to advocate, to help them advocate for those services that they need. Systems advocacy, we work with many agencies, local agencies, state agencies, and even national agencies to help advocate for the rights of people with disabilities and making sure that people with disabilities have equal access and opportunity. Transition. Transition, you've heard a lot about transition from what Pete's saying. That's a little bit different in our realm. Transition, we actually define it as not only youth services, which is below, but then also transitioning out of institutions and into the community. So we help individuals who may be in a nursing home, who may be in an institution, who may be in jail, and they're a person with a disability, and helping them transition out into the community and lead their most independent life. We provide outreach and training. So part of what I'm doing today is outreach, letting you know about our services, but then we also provide training to organizations on topics such as disability etiquette and sensitivity. We partner directly with organizations and employers on accessibility assessments. So making sure that physical spaces, digital spaces are accessible for people with disabilities. Youth services. So a lot of that encompasses the pre-eds that Pete was talking about earlier. Able South Carolina, we are contracted with VR contracts with us to provide those pre-ed services. So we do have youth with disabilities that go into the schools and teach pre-eds to those other youth with disabilities. We also have a peer support group, EQUIP, that is focused on youth. And then assistive technology. We have low-tech AT that we receive free of charge, that gets donated to us, gets cleaned up, repurposed, and then we give those items out. So things like wheelchairs, bedpans, incontinence supplies. So that could be a resource for you as well. Next slide. Hire Me SC. This is our campaign for employment. And with Hire Me SC, we direct Hire Me SC, but we've got over 40 different organizations that's involved in this initiative. And what Hire Me SC, the goal really is to promote employment for people with disabilities, to show that people with disabilities can work and want to work. So on our Hire Me SC website, we've got some resources for different populations. We have success stories. We have upcoming events. I forgot events there. And then we also have an opportunity to connect for employment questions. So a lot of times we have people may reach out to Hire Me SC because they may have trouble getting services, or they may not understand what agencies in their area they can connect to for employment help. And so we're there to assist with that. We also are on all the social media channels, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next slide, please. These are some resources that Pete compiled, some VR and Commission for the Blind transition resources, and these are links. And Aaron, remind me, are we going to be able to send out this PowerPoint to folks?
Yes, absolutely. The way that will work is if you would like a copy of the presentation, please feel free to email me. I'll give my information at the end, or put it in the chat. Put your email in the chat and I'll be glad to send it out.
Okay, great. Great. Yeah, these are fabulous resources that you can check out to learn more about transition services and learn more about the vocational rehabilitation program. Next slide, please. So practical transition tips. Pete wanted me to talk, more practically what needs to happen on the ground as far as transition, as far as Voc Rehab and Commission for the Blind interacting with students with disabilities. And a little bit about my background. I worked for Vocational Rehabilitation for 9 years previous to coming to Able, South Carolina. And probably about 6 of those years I worked with transition students. So I like to think I have a pretty good base of this, pretty good knowledge of what VR can provide as far as youth with disabilities. And then also in my work at Able, South Carolina, one thing that I have been doing is we ran a pilot program for about 4 years as a part of an initiative that we had that just recently ended. But with that pilot program, we were in 6 school districts. And we were really, one of the main goals was getting students connected to services, services to VR, services to DDSN. And with that pilot program, we were working with students with mainly intellectual and developmental disabilities, students that were non-diploma track students that were not going to be receiving a regular high school diploma. And what we really found through that is that the majority of students with more significant disabilities, with intellectual and developmental disabilities, they were not connected to services with vocational rehabilitation. Oftentimes they did not know about services at vocational rehabilitation. And sometimes even the parent or the teacher, they thought that those students wouldn't qualify for voc rehab services for one reason or another. Sometimes, we really had to do a lot of communication with the student, with the parent, with the teacher, letting them know that these students have access to voc rehab services as well. And so what I would say from that pilot program is, if you're working with students with more significant disabilities, definitely encourage them to apply for voc rehab services. Voc rehab is designed and is supposed to serve folks with more significant disabilities and help them reach their employment goals. And so encourage them to apply. And then if you're having barriers or concerns in that, then don't hesitate to reach out to us at ABLE South Carolina or Disability Rights South Carolina. Because oftentimes those are the students that need voc rehab services the most. They have usually more significant barriers to employment, and those services would really benefit them. So some practical transition tips. Ask for a vocational assessment. If you actually go through the process of applying for voc rehab services, first you're going to go through the eligibility process. Once you become eligible for services, then you're supposed to get a vocational assessment. And that vocational assessment is where you'll sit down with a VR staff. They'll ask you more about what types of jobs you're interested in. They'll learn more about you, learn more about your personality, and help you learn more about the careers that are in demand in the area. What's the pay range for those jobs? What do those jobs look like? So for example, are you sitting down for those jobs? Are you standing up? Are you inside? Are you outside? Or are you working with a lot of people? Or are you mainly working by yourself? So that vocational assessment is really important to help you figure out what types of jobs may be a better fit for you. And once you go through that vocational assessment and you're receiving services through VR, you can always ask for another vocational assessment if your interests change or if you're wanting to learn more about different types of careers. But from that vocational assessment, what will happen is you'll get a vocational goal, and that'll basically be the job, the career that VR is helping you prepare for. And all the services that are in that plan that Pete talked about, that plan for employment, those services will direct you back towards you achieving that career goal. So it's very important that you understand what your career goal is with voc rehab, because those services that you'll get will align with that career goal. And if you're not satisfied with that career goal, if you want to do something else, then it's important that you talk to your VR counselor about that. Find out about assistive technology, rehab technology. VR has a rehab technology department. So it's really important that you understand what rehab technology may be available to you. And this could be technology that could help you in training, could help you in school with your education, and then also eventually into a job, into a career. Like Pete mentioned, invite VR and Commission for the Blind to IEP meetings. That's important. The IEP meetings, those are meetings where you're determining what's going to happen after high school. And it's important that VR and the Commission for the Blind gets invited to those meetings. Ask for help with community work experiences. I'm like Pete in this. I love community work experiences. This was something that I love this about my job when I worked at VR. I love to set these up. And VR can actually pay for these work experiences. They can pay the student for those work experiences, and they can cover the student under their workers' comp. And so they can do internships, apprenticeships in the community in a career field that the student is interested in. And so these are so important to help a student learn more about what types of jobs are out there, really get to see a job in action and determine if that's a good fit for you. Sometimes it was more important for the student to figure out, I don't want to do that job, rather than they do. And so that can be a really great learning experience for students. Work on resume and interviewing skills. And those are things that should be happening with some of the pre-ET services, but then also once an individual becomes eligible for VR services and they've got their plan, their VR counselor should really be working with them on those interviewing skills, on helping them with job applications and helping them to develop a resume. Learn self-advocacy skills. Like Pete mentioned, learn those skills to help you advocate for yourself. Learn about your employment rights. People with disabilities have employment rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so it's important that you know about those rights, you know how to advocate for yourself. And that's something that VR can assist with, but that's also something that we at Able South Carolina can assist with. Because again, we are people with disabilities. A lot of times we have gone through that ourselves with having to advocate for our needs. Learn about your disability and appropriate times to disclose. So, learn more about your disability, how that disability affects you, and whether or not you really even need to disclose a disability. Sometimes students will automatically think that, oh, I have a disability, I need to disclose to my employer, but it's really important that they understand not necessarily. You really only have to disclose if you need a reasonable accommodation. And it's a very personal choice. And so talking through that, making sure that the student has someone that they can talk through that and kind of figure out if that's something they would want or need to do in the future. Next slide, please. Contact post-secondary schools to ask about their accommodation process. So if a student is looking to go on to higher ed after high school, if they're going to a community college, if they're going to a university, contact those schools to ask about their accommodation process. That process is going to be different than in high school. In high school, the teachers automatically provide those accommodations for you. They kind of set everything up. But once you exit high school and go on to post-secondary ed, go on to a community college, go on to university, it's really up to the student to advocate for themselves and let disability services at this college know, I have a disability, I have these needs, I need these accommodations. And it's much better to go ahead and set up those accommodations ahead of time and maybe not necessarily not need them than not have those accommodations in place and need them. I have witnessed that so many times in that students, they want to say, oh, well, I'm done with that. I had those accommodations all through high school. I'm done with it. I'm going on to college and I don't need them anymore. And then, they don't have them set up and they end up flunking out on some classes so it's much better to go ahead and understand that process and go ahead and apply, even if you don't necessarily need those accommodations. Become familiar with accommodations and practice requesting reasonable accommodations. And then ask for copies of documentation from VR and the Commission for the Blind, especially your individualized plan for employment, your IPE. So that's, like Pete said, that's the plan that you have with VR, the Commission for the Blind, and your vocational assessment. You need to know what the individualized employment plan says, what types of services are on there, what types of services VR is saying that they're going to provide you with, so you know what to expect. And then that vocational assessment, what types of career are they helping prepare you for? And then work with your VR and Commission for the Blind counselor to determine that if you qualify for financial assistance, for transportation, post-secondary education, work tools, clothes, assistive technology. There's so much that VR can provide as far as financial assistance for things to help you prepare for work. And even if you're currently working, things to help you maintain that job. And so definitely work with your counselor to determine, you know, what those items are and if you qualify for those items. Next slide. If you're denied services from VR or the Commission for the Blind, don't be afraid to reach out for assistance and support from Disability Rights South Carolina and or ABLE South Carolina. And you know, one clarification I did want to make is that Disability Rights South Carolina is a legal organization. ABLE South Carolina is not. And so sometimes if you reach out to us first, we can definitely help you advocate for those needs, and then also advocate with you with a particular agency. But sometimes if we're not seeing much movement in that process, then we may encourage you to reach out to Disability Rights South Carolina, especially since they fall under the Client Assistance Program. And then remember that people with disabilities, just like those without, have their own unique set of skills, talents, and abilities, and explore those first to determine the best job fit and consider accommodations you may need based on a disability. I get, you know, on the Hire Me SC email list, I probably get 2 or 3 emails a week saying, I'm a person with a disability. What types of job can I do? And I always want to say, no. We need to flip this script. You know, who are you? What types of interests do you have? What types of skills do you have? What types of talents do you have? Let's think about that first. And then we think about, okay, do we need to accommodate the disability? Is there anything different, modifications that we need to make to that job because of your disability? But there's not any particular type of job that's best fit for somebody with a disability. People with disabilities are as diverse and unique as anyone else. And then last but not least, your VR and Commission for the Blind counselor should be connecting with you monthly. And if they're not, I would encourage you to call them, keep up with them, ask them, you know, what are we doing on my plan? What are we doing? What's the progress of the services that you're supposed to be providing me? Keep up to date with them. And if you're not getting through to your counselor, then definitely reach out to us at ABLE South Carolina or Disability Rights South Carolina. Next slide. Okay, I'll hand it back over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Pete and Sandy. And you guys have left exactly 10 minutes for questions, which is so perfect. So we will take any questions in the chat, and I'll be looking for raised hands. Maybe during that, Phil, will you go to the next slide so we can get some contact information up? That is our info line, helpline, TTY. If you prefer email, that's just fine with us. And do take advantage of our website. Just a little plug in there while we're waiting for questions. And I am going to read my email out. If there are folks who would like copies of the slides, Sandy and Pete have agreed to provide those. My email address is haire, my last name, HAIRE, at disabilityrightssc.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And so you can just reach out to me and I will be glad to send those to you. I just sent that to Sandy. And then we've got Sandy's Sandy's contact information that she can introduce. It looks about like ours.
Yes. So again, my name is Sandy Jordan. I'm Director of Employment Programs at ABLE, South Carolina. We have a phone number, TTY, and then email address sjordan, JORDAN, at able-sc.org. And then we have our website as well.
And I'm gonna, if I don't see any questions, we will give you back 9 minutes of your day. Oh, we do. We have a question from Candace, who says, sometimes you'll see IEP have transition goals and career goals. Does the school do some of community visits and job training, or is that all handled by VR? And does the school get VR involved, or it's kind of on the parents to do it?
I'll start with that, and Sandy, jump in with any thoughts you have. But it is not on the school to do all of it. VR is a partner in that process, and that's I mean, that's why they were made a partner, was so they could help out. So it's both VR and the school, and remember, VR is really supposed to coordinate with the school, and so they should be working together to provide those services. And either the school or the parent can get VR involved. And so if the school's not doing it, parent, you do it, or student, you do it. And if you don't know how, or you have questions about that process, you can contact us or contact ABLE, and we can help you make contact with the people you need to talk to.
Sandy, nothing to add?
Pete said exactly what I was going to say.
Great. I love it when that happens. We have another, excuse me, another questions. I'm assuming it's for ABLE or DRSC. Do you assist in matters regarding lack of effective services from SC Works? They create individualized plans for employment, but the ones that they're creating are sometimes not helpful.
Yeah, and I can take this one. So we do. So that's a part of our individual and systems advocacy. So like I mentioned before, we not only can assist individuals with help advocating for those services, but also the system advocacy matters. So working with those agencies to make sure that services are provided in the appropriate ways for people with disabilities. And so that not only includes services through vocational rehabilitation, but then also SC Works. And so if you are having some concerns in that matter, please reach out. You know, I think to us, I can't speak for Disability Rights South Carolina, but you can definitely reach out to me at ABLE South Carolina, and we'll take a look at that and help you advocate for those needs, and then also present that to SC Works as a system to make sure that they know some of those barriers that are coming up.
Yeah, and I will just say same for Disability Rights South Carolina. Yes, we have helped people and are available to help people who are not getting effective services from SC Works. We've also gotten involved in a couple of situations where the individual needed some accommodations from SC Works, and help them through that accommodation process and to get the accommodations they needed.
Thanks, guys. Okay, we have just a few more minutes left for questions. I'll give that a second. And make sure no hands are raised. Okay, and if you think of questions post presentation, please do take advantage of the contact information we've put up, and do email me if you would like the slides. And with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our presenters, Sandy and Pete, for a lot of information that I learned a lot from. Thank you to our interpreters and to Phil for doing our technology piece. And we will see everybody next month on the 16th talking about Medicaid. Thanks, everyone.